GALP.
Missed the last train. Need to book an Uber. Bloody hell, no Wi-Fi. Oh, I guess I'm staying up all night. Oh, I'm too old for this. Out drinking late in Japan? Stay safe and be prepared. Get Wi-Fi coverage across Japan and Google where to go. Rent a mini Wi-Fi router or eSIM with Ninja Wi-Fi. Trusted by 21 million customers worldwide, Ninja Wi-Fi provides great service for an affordable price. Visit ninjawifi.com and use the code GAL for 20% off.
この番組はグランドスポンサーの提供でお送りします。
Hey guys, and welcome to GALP. It's me, Bish, and today I'm gonna give you some information that I just found out recently. It's been almost maybe 15 years since I started this sort of project where I've been trying to find out who owns the publishing rights for the retro Dynasty Warriors games. Whoops, I said Dynasty Warriors. I actually mean Dynasty Warriors because I'm from the UK. I had to say Dynasty Warriors so that our American listeners can understand what I'm saying, because some people have been commenting and they're like, what's Dynasty Warriors? It's Dynasty Warriors. So from here on out, I'll call it Dynasty Warriors. So what is it? How did I find out? I'm going to take you back in time, but before I do, let's get the disclaimer out of the way. For you new folks, GALP is a weekly gaming discussion podcast under the GALP Podcast Network. We talk about all sorts of games from big AAA titles all the way to awesome indie games, but our forte is Japanese games, so expect that a lot. We can be found anywhere where you listen to podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon Podcasts, and Podbean. Whilst you're there, be sure to give us a 5-star review, and remember, if you want to join in on all the fun, then follow us on all of our socials. That's Blue Sky, TikTok, Insta, and X, all at GALP Podcasts. So how did I come up with this whole idea and this wild goose chase, let's say? I'm going to basically spoil it. It's been a wild goose chase, and yeah, I found out the answer, and it was incredibly simple. But let's basically talk about it. So a few years ago, you were able, and by a few years ago, I mean like 10 years ago, on the PlayStation 3, not even the PlayStation 3 actually, I think 10 years ago was, well, regardless, it was on the PlayStation 3. In the UK, you were able to download the older Dynasty Warriors games, as well as Warriors Orochi, and play them on the PlayStation 3, whether or not you had a PS2 compatible one, because it played it through emulation and stuff. They were recently removed from the store, so you can't really re-download them now or anything like that. But originally on the store, it was Dynasty Warriors 4, Samurai Warriors, I think 2, Musou Orochi 1 and 2, as well as Dynasty Warriors 5 and Kessen 3. Now, these are very important because why not Kessen 2? Well, Kessen 2 was originally published by THQ, if you don't remember. And why not Dynasty Warriors 3? Well, Dynasty Warriors 3 in Europe was also published by THQ, and Dynasty Warriors 2 was published by Midas Interactive. Now, this is where the wild goose chase begins. These things were never on the PlayStation Store, and when they removed them from the store, I was thinking, well, what's happening now? Did Koei lose the rights to these older games? They didn't. I did confirm that with Koei. They just removed it from the store for whatever reason. I think it was around the time where Sony were contemplating just removing access to the PlayStation 3's PSN store altogether, and I think Koei may have jumped the gun on that. We haven't gotten those games since. Now, Tomohiko Sho, the producer for Dynasty Warriors Origins, had expressed an intention of potentially bringing back these retro games, potentially through a retro collection, but we're not really confirming that. Because I find that sometimes Tomohiko Sho, when he talks about Dynasty Warriors, yes, he is a producer at Omega Force, but ultimately it's not down to Omega Force. I mean, yes, they are technically Koei's first party developer, but they don't make the decision on what games they develop effectively. It's down to Koei in that publishing capacity to decide. Or they'll go up to Omega Force and tell them, hey, let's make this game. Because they've done that in the past. Like, there are Musou games that are not developed by Omega Force. It's not necessarily given to Omega Force. For example, Hyrule Warriors. The first one, I think, was Team Ninja. Like, it's stuff like that, right? So, besides the point, it's not really down to Tomohiko Sho. So, back then, I was just thinking, well, maybe how come we haven't received a HD collection? And many years had passed, and I was thinking, oh, it might be because Koei doesn't own the licenses. At the time, I did speak to Koei and I asked them directly, Koei Europe, I said, hey, do you know who owns the licenses for these games? And they were very honest with me and they were like, we don't know. We genuinely do not know who owns the licenses for Shin Sangoku Musou or Shin Sangoku Musou 2, which is Dynasty Warriors 2 and Dynasty Warriors 3. They were not aware of who owned those publishing rights. They had then sort of recommended that I speak to the original publishers. So I tried to speak to Midas Interactive. Midas Interactive had sort of dissolved as a company. So I then spoke to a gentleman known as Ghostlight Ross, who used to work for Ghostlight, which was the company that is almost like a sister company of Midas Interactive around that time. And obviously they were most responsible for like the Persona Portable, like Persona 1 Portable, Persona 2 Portable, and Persona 3 Portable. They were responsible for publishing those on the PSP in Europe. So I spoke with him and he didn't have a clue either. He had helped me a lot with that, but he didn't have a clue, which is unfortunate. So I was trying to find anyone who worked at Midas to kind of give me an idea. I didn't know this at the time, but I had actually come across Hideki from Tokyo Toys. As you guys may know, Tokyo Toys is a very huge sort of company, very iconic if you went to MCM in the past, or if you ever went to, Piccadilly Circus back in the day, Trocadero, and you would go to Tokyo Toys and not buy anything. But we did multiple recordings with Hideki, and he was like, I used to work at Midas. And I was like, what? You can go back on previous episodes and actually hear that. He worked as a graphic designer at Midas Interactive. I was like, okay, cool. Now I've got some sort of lead. But I didn't pursue it at the time because I thought, well, if Koei wanted to get the license, they could easily get it. It doesn't really need to go anywhere. And there was a point where I thought, well, Midas doesn't exist anymore. Probably during liquidation of the company, rights were probably passed along or sold on to another company via a bank of some sorts, or maybe a bank owns it, or maybe an individual owns the rights to that. And if it was the case that an individual owns the rights, then I was actually going to seek out the individual and potentially buy the rights for Dynasty Warriors 2 and 3 and potentially publish them myself or just gift them back to Koei. That was my main idea, my main plan. But I didn't need to do that because guess what? There's more to this story. So after speaking to Ross and after speaking to Hideki, I thought, okay, well, Midas, there's no way I'm going to be able to speak to Midas. Let me try and speak to THQ. I had spoken to THQ initially, and then they went bust. And then they've kind of split into what is now known as THQ Nordic, which is not the same company as the original THQ, right? So they didn't know what was going on. The person I was speaking to at THQ before it went into administration, basically I lost that contact and I was like, oh, what the hell? So now I don't know what's going on with the game. And I had always been under the impression that, the reason we're not going to get a Dynasty Warriors Retro Collection is because they don't have the rights in Europe to publish all of these games. And they wouldn't publish a game that's exclusive for America or exclusive for Japan without bringing it to Europe, because it's obviously a very big market. So I started to think, well, what could Koei do? If they don't have the license for Dynasty Warriors 2, how would they get around it? Well, Koei's done this in the past with publishing, and we kind of see this happen a lot. Like, for example, Wild Hearts. EA has publishing rights for Wild Hearts, and I presume it's on consoles and whatnot, and on PC. Koei makes a new game, Wild Hearts S, for the Nintendo Switch 2, and that S is very important because it then means, well, it's a different game. And also you can argue that, well, the fact that there is no crossplay and there are features that are exclusive to this game that we're not going to see on the PC version. I mean, EA could update it, but then I think that's probably the terms that they've come up with EA to sort of differentiate the game and allow them to have publishing rights for this Switch-only version. But more so in Europe as well, you have to remember Attack on Titan. In America, it was called Attack on Titan Wings of Freedom or whatever, I believe. Shingeki no Kyojin. But in Europe, it was called AOT because they couldn't have the naming rights, I think, for Attack on Titan. I think another company had owned it. I'm not sure. It might have been like someone else who had trademarked it or whatever in Europe beforehand. So they got around with that by renaming it. So if Koei really wanted to do a Dynasty Warriors Retro Collection, they could call it DWHD Collection. I mean, they could do that, but I think that sort of takes away brand name. They could just call it Dynasty Warriors HD Collection, right? Because they've got the trademark for Dynasty Warriors. They don't need to call it Dynasty Warriors 2. I think in the menu they can call it something else. They can call it DW2, for example, or DW3 to sort of circumvent that in terms of publishing rights. They could have called it Shin Sangoku Musou HD Collection, similar to what we have with Sengoku Basara. They could have done a bunch of different things, but then it made me think, why didn't Koei do that? They had ways around it. If it was truly down to publishing rights, they had ways around it. Why didn't they take advantage? They have before, like I mentioned with Attack on Titan, with other games in their repertoire, but why not Dynasty Warriors? So I started to think, is there actually something wrong with publishing rights? There wasn't. You're like, what? So Bish, you're telling me your 15 years of research and you've fumbled upon the actual true answer? Yes, I did. And it's embarrassing to say that, but it gives us hope for the future. Because now we know, drumroll please, that Koei has had the rights, the publishing rights for Shin Sangoku Musou and Shin Sangoku Musou 2, aka Dynasty Warriors 2 and Dynasty Warriors 3 in Europe the whole time. The whole time they had publishing rights. And I'm presuming no one in Koei had known, right? Because you had to remember Koei Europe, I think was established in 2005 or so, at least in terms of a publishing house capacity, which is kind of insane to think about. And these games were published pre-2005. So I don't think that there's any members of staff currently working at Koei that's been there for that amount of time. The only person I would imagine would have maybe been at Koei from the very beginning would have been Will, who is now, I believe, like managing director at Reef Entertainment. Realistically speaking, I should have gone to him first and asked him, hey, so what's going on with Dynasty Warriors publishing rights? He's a treasure trove of knowledge, at least Koei Tecmo, because he's worked there a long time. He could have told me that information and we could have got it over and done with. That's assuming he would have known. I'm presuming he would have, but I just didn't go to the right person to speak. Now, how did I find out? I went to CX and I purchased a copy of Dynasty Warriors 3. Now, this copy looks very different and I was very excited. I was like, oh my God, it comes with its original manual and the game looks cool. And I was like, wait a minute, the game was not released in 2005. Why is there a copyright notice from 2005? That doesn't make sense. And then I looked at it again and I was like, why does this only say Koei? Where's the THQ badge on it? There was no THQ badge and it made me think. I was like, okay, what is this? I looked into it a little bit further and Koei had this line called Koei the Best or something like that. Actually, I've got the game with me right now. Yeah, it's called The Best Koei. And it actually has PEGI ratings on there, which is actually pretty interesting because I don't believe games had PEGI ratings back then. I think they had different types of ratings. I don't even think they did have PEGI ratings on them because I don't think PEGI ratings existed. Let me Google that because I might be wrong. PEGI ratings might have existed. You know, it wasn't a PEGI rating. It was, I don't know if you guys remember, it was like an EU specific rating. And it was, oddly enough, given a 15 plus. Okay, that's a bit weird. But this has got a PEGI 12. So this game got re-released by Koei, which means Koei has the publishing rights for this game. And I looked into it, and if you look on the back, in the manual, lovely manual, by the way, I paid £6 for this, and it shows you all of the best Koei titles. Now, what is the best Koei? What does that badge mean? That badge is kind of like, you know, when Sony did Platinum Collection on PS2. So this wasn't the original release of the game. This was a reprint. Why is that important? When you look at all the other the best Koei titles available now and coming soon, these titles were all games that Koei developed or Omega Force had developed, but were not published by Koei originally. So Dynasty Warriors 2, Mystic Heroes, Dynasty Warriors 3, Dynasty Tactics 2, Kessen 2 even, as well as a bunch of other games, even the Samurai Warriors series. So yeah, Koei always had publishing rights for these games. They always did, since 2005, believe it or not. So that brings up a bigger question. If Koei had the publishing rights, what are they doing with it? Because for me to find out, I'm sure someone at Koei, at least in Japan, knows that this is the case. And I'd be very surprised if the Japanese team doesn't know that they have publishing rights for these older games in Europe. There's at least someone in Japan that has that information, or even if they forgot about it, they would have sent some sort of legal inquiry or some sort of lawyers or whatever to figure out what is the publishing rights situation, and they would have found that out quite easy. But yeah, they own those publishing rights. So what is next for Koei in terms of this? Well, I think it's time for Koei to do a retro collection on the PlayStation 5, on modern consoles, on PC even, and give us Dynasty Warriors 2, Dynasty Warriors 3, 4, 5, and maybe even 6. Why do I say 6? I think it's best to include 6 because 6 technically was a PS2 game, but also released on the PS3. Didn't get a PS2 version in Europe, but got a PS2 version in North America and in Japan, known as Shin Sangoku Musou 5 Special, and it kind of run very poorly. So yeah, but what I mean by that is I don't think 6 had a PC port. It might have, actually, come to think of it, I think it did. Give us those retro games in one package and charge us like $60 for it. I think that's a fair price. I think maybe some people will be like, no, that's too much, maybe 50. But considering how many games you will get and probably on one disc, it's kind of insane. But how would they do that, right? How would they manage to do that? Would they just upscale it using AI, which we hope they don't do? I think Koei should follow their quote-unquote friends at Capcom with the Sengoku Basara HD collection. That was an excellent HD collection. We got the game in its original aspect ratios. There was some bars around it. I think for cutscenes they had like an overlay so that you didn't really notice the black bars. But the gameplay was, I think, in 720p. I don't think it was even 1080p. But obviously that was on a PlayStation 3. So genuinely, I think Koei can do it. At least with Dynasty Warriors 6, they can upscale that very easily. Even with Dynasty Warriors 7 and 8, to be fair with you. But I genuinely think they can give us Dynasty Warriors 2, 3, 4, and 5 at least in one package. And there is, I believe, a anniversary coming up, because I think Dynasty Warriors 2 came out in 2000. So there's a 25th anniversary of Dynasty Warriors. Some could say, well, we got Origins, but I think this is what the fan wants. This is what the fans want. Even Tomohiko Sho wants this as well, as being the producer at Omega Force. Now, some people are saying, well, we've got Omega Force doing other games, you know, Warriors Abyss. And I've been told that in the past that they are quite busy with Warriors Abyss, but there is not much going on with Warriors Abyss at the moment. But after speaking to Koei and trying to actually communicate with Tomohiko Sho, who is someone that actually wants to come on the podcast, but you have to bear in mind there is a lot of permissions that we have to go through. And being told by Koei Europe that there is that they're focusing on Warriors Abyss. I don't think they're focusing on Warriors Abyss. I think they're focusing on either an expansion game for Origins or a more traditional style game that's coming up. Now, would it be remastered? I don't think it's going to be like a remaster or like a remake or anything like that. I think it's just going to be an upscaled version of those old games, untouched. But what I'd like to see is Japanese audio and English audio. And I think for some of these older games, I think up until Dynasty Warriors 5, I think you had full European audio. So I think some games had Russian, Italian, French, German, Spanish. Let's see those return as well, or if not, just give us English and Japanese. Fun fact as well, I didn't know if you guys knew this, but if you ever played Dynasty Warriors 3, this wasn't the case in Dynasty Warriors 2, but if you ever played Dynasty Warriors 3, the battle sounds and the Musou sounds made by the characters were taken directly from the Japanese version. And if you can speak Japanese or recognize some Japanese, you can understand it. And I was playing it the other day. I was like, wow, how did I not notice this? But you don't realize it. You just think, oh, it's just random sounds. They were done by the Japanese voice actors. And then the cutscenes and the battle dialogue was done by the English voice cast. And I imagine that's sort of to save money and to kind of make it less complex, which just makes sense, I guess. So yeah, that is what happened to the publishing rights for Dynasty Warriors 2 and Dynasty Warriors 3, as well as a bunch of other games like Kisen and Dynasty Tactics and Mystic Heroes and Champion Jockey. Let's get Champion Jockey back. Koei still makes those games and they are still published in Japan on a regular basis. Let's bring back G1 Jockey, Champion Jockey. Let's bring it back, Koei. Let's do it. I think the last game, actually got released on on Nintendo Switch, I think. But yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, and Koei's actually still in the same building as they were back in the day, actually, surprisingly. This is pretty interesting. I'm looking at the information on here, on this manual, and it says the building that I've been to many times, by the way. A lot of people don't necessarily believe that, but yeah, I've been to the Koei offices before. And yeah, pretty cool. Even the disc, I'm looking at it now, has no mention of THQ on the disc. So yeah, Tecmo could easily give us a HD collection. Now, there is the sort of question, what about the Masters? And that is also a thing as well. I think it's one of the reasons why on the Xbox, when we got SSX, it was SSX 3 and it wasn't tricky and it wasn't the original SSX because they didn't have the original masters or something, or the source code or something like that. I don't know, but that was the reason. And they sort of had to rebuild the game from the ground up. But Koei, just do it, man. Just give it to us. I think another thing is, if Koei even wanted to do a remake of these older games, they could, because they have the assets. They've got the costumes for different variations of character models since Dynasty Warriors 7, and they've also designed the maps since Dynasty Warriors 7. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but there was like DLC for Dynasty Warriors 7. This blew my mind, and this is where the idea of a remaster came along in my head. It was on the Conquest mode or the Ambition mode. I can't remember the name of it. I think it was called Conquest mode in Dynasty Warriors 7, where basically you can experience these older maps. And I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. Getting to play as Wang Yuanji in Hulao Gate from Dynasty Warriors 2 with the old music. And that was where the nostalgia hit. Since then, Koei has never done that before. They would include those maps in Empire's games to kind of fill it out a little bit more. And they would include the music in Empire's games, once again, to fill it out a bit more. I don't think since then we've ever even had those maps return. And Koei just has them designed. I'm like, okay, Koei, give it to us. Give it to us. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, or join our Discord, or Blue Sky and X. Just let me know. And now we can put that sort of legend to bed. There's a lot of speculation online, and I did see a lot of people that were like, oh, Koei doesn't have the rights. And that's because I had said that. I was the one that was saying that because I was going down this wild goose chase, but it's done. I caught the goose. It was in front of me this whole time. Dynasty Warriors 3 was the answer. Sorry, the best Koei. Dynasty Warriors 3 was the answer. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that episode. And yeah, bye.